All right, in Privacy Watch, tens of millions of Americans' movements are being tracked on a day-to-day basis, while companies are reportedly collecting the data and buying and reselling it for their own profit. An investigation from the New York Times discovered dozens of companies are logging location pings from the phones of more than 12 million Americans. Those companies go largely unregulated. The sources who provided the information to the Times say they are concerned with how the information might be abused and wanted to inform the public and lawmakers. Let's bring in Charlie Warzel. He's a writer at large for the New York Times opinion page. He's also one of the reporters who worked on this investigation. Charlie, thank you so much for joining us. So who is all this information going to exactly, and for what purpose? It seems like just a massive amount of information.
Yeah, so what we collected is actually a small sliver of what is being collected every day, every moment. The data that we had was from about a 6-month period. It was about 12 million smartphones and about 50 billion pings from those phones, individual pings. And each ping represents your exact location, sometimes down to a couple inches, sometimes down to a couple feet, depending. But I mean, what we wanted to show with this trove, and I believe what our sources wanted to show the world, is just the absolute scale and scope. And so, who's collecting this? This is coming from third-party apps that you have. Basically, any app that is asking you to share your location. Sometimes that's for things like turn-by-turn directions, and it's very useful. And sometimes it's for things like a coupon app or something very small, and it's kind of unclear why they need your location. But some of the more shady applications have a secondary business where they sell all this kind of information and repackage it, all your location data. And there are third-party data brokers that are middlemen essentially and make their entire living just buying and selling and repackaging this information. So there's a lot out there, and what we have shown, even though it's kind of overwhelming, is just the tip of the iceberg.
So you say that there are these third-party brokers who are kind of selling this, and bundling it up and selling it, because it sounds like there's just a ton of information out here, a ton of information to sift through. Who's buying that?
So lots of people. Essentially, the big data revolution here means that a lot of companies are trying to get better insights this way. So one way to think about it is probably the most practical use for a business is knowing where people are in, say, a mall. So traffic patterns, stores could buy that information. Back in the day, companies like Walmart used to actually use satellite photos to check the people in how many cars were in the parking lot at given times. But this is obviously so much easier for companies to understand where people were in close to real time. So you have companies like that. Sometimes there's been reports that hedge funds use this information, but there are obviously darker, more nefarious purposes. Vice's Motherboard website reported last January that bounty hunters were buying location information from telecom. So that's different than these applications, but it shows that this information is useful to people who are just trying to track individuals down.
So this is obviously presenting a huge privacy concern. Are there any laws in place to protect users from essentially being followed to this extent?
So the difficulty here is that there are some laws that will come onto the books in California. January 1st, there's the California privacy law, which has some provisions. But the real issue here, and one of the reasons why we wanted to report this story the way that we did, is that a lot of the laws around privacy refer to personally identifiable information. So that is your, a password that's linked to your username, your address, things that are very easily traceable back to you. And this location data is allowed to be bought, sold, collected because it's technically anonymous. It doesn't have any emails or things associated with it. But what we proved in this 7-part series that we did is that it's incredibly easy to de-anonymize people. As long as you have a home and an address and a work, it's about 90% certain that you can do that. And so the laws in place right now don't qualify location data as personally identifiable. And without that, there's really not a lot you can do.
Which that kind of perplexes me a little bit that they can't. It's easy. It would be relatively easy to conclude whose phone the information is coming from. I feel like if you have any sort of sophisticated skills, in tracking people. But so I guess the big question for me is. who should be responsible in taking care of this trove of information? Should it be a government? Should it be the individual? And if it is the individual, what steps should people take to secure their data?
Sure. So on the individual level, we need more power as consumers over the data that we're sharing and what we're sharing and how much. Some of this is just simply knowing enough and understanding this enough to make an informed decision. And hopefully this report and some of the visualizations my partner Stuart Thompson created really show you and help people understand. So a way that you can protect yourself is you can go into your settings and you can turn off location services on all the apps that you don't necessarily need them. Something like Google Maps, or any mapping application, you might want that. That's very useful. But a coupon app, a gas saving app, a weather app that you rarely use that is checking your location a couple times a minute, you might want to turn that off. And then I think the biggest thing, though, is to know that without Congress stepping in, creating some laws, without us having a real conversation about this in the technology sector, there's really no way for people to be 100% safe from this. We've essentially created a surveillance state, and all of us have sort of bought in because of convenience. And I think we're reckoning with that right now. So it's going to be a process.
Yeah, it's an interesting observation. Certainly, technology is intertwined so deeply in everyone's life. Charlie Warzel, thank you very much.
Thank you.